I was going through my fantasy rankings and I realized something. There are a lot of little red flag players that I either haven't talked to you guys about in detail or at the very least in a long time. We know all the big red flag players, the injury risk players, the guys in terrible situations, but who are the sneaky little red flags that are just kind of lurking in the corner? Guys that aren't going to destroy your fantasy team, but guys that you might at the end of the season look back and say, wait, that kind of sucked. Know all the facts before you click the draft button. Now, go with me on this. In the running backs handcuff video, I said that Braylon Allen is the handcuff, but if Breece Hall goes down, I'm not really interested in this backfield. And then I asked myself a question, Tara, are you really actually even interested in Breece Hall? And the answer was, not really. I haven't clicked the draft button for him this offseason. I really don't intend to. I mean, it's not a full fade, but I'm not particularly interested. We, myself included, tend to give Breece Hall a pass because even when the offense is straight trash, as it has quite frequently been in his poor young career, he can still skate by with his receiving upside. But there are concerns here if you dig deeper. Not concerns with his talent, no. But concerns that what we saw out of him last year and the prior year might be on repeat yet again for a third time in a row. And if that's the case, we are drafting him above a very logical outcome, unfortunately. When we look at Hall's stats overall, he is maxed out in terms of rushing yards last year. That was 1,065 rushing yards. Now let's look at receptions. Let's disregard last year because apparently checkdowns were scary for the Jets quarterbacks, backup quarterbacks. Justin Fields had zero problem with it, but the backups couldn't do it. I don't know. Let's go to 2023, the 76 reception year where Hall was RB6 in average fantasy points per game. That came when the second best pass catcher was Tyler Conklin. And Zach Wilson was the quarterback. Let's jump to 2024, the Aaron Rodgers year. Still good checkdowns, 57 receptions. That was a struggle team, 5 and 12. So he couldn't get anything done on the ground. It was just receptions that kind of carried him through, but overall production was just kind of like, it was okay, but it was not anything super inspiring. And I think that 2024 might actually be the best comp to what could be the best case scenario here for 2026. Now let's loop in Geno Smith. Geno has no problem checking down, right? I would expect the check down rate to look very similar of what we saw with Aaron Rodgers and Breece Hall. If the offensive line is trashed, Geno will check down to Hall. Ironically, if you look at the receptions and targets from Aaron Rodgers to Breece Hall, and then look at the ones from Geno Smith and Ashton Jeanty last year, it's the same stats. So the question you have to ask yourself, do you want a duplication of Ashton Jeanty's workload from last year? I can't say that I want to be subjected to that again, right? Because the path was very volatile. Now, the counterpoint here would be, well, what if the offensive line is better than what we saw in Vegas and Geno bounces back? Yeah. Well, unfortunately for Geno, that means that he will check down less if the offensive line is better. So then we are relying on groundwork, which again has maxed out at 1,000 yards. This might be one of those things where the result isn't absolutely awful, but you look back and say, what if I drafted XYZ because there were 5+ players around him that gave a far better output? And your pick there of Breece Hall didn't really pay off. Wasn't a bust, but it was just kind of mediocre. I am Team Bryce Young. I love him, but unfortunately, the reality is that from a fantasy perspective, there is an issue that we have to get past with him, and I don't think that we are going to because everything the Panthers have done screams, we want to run the ball. We want to lean on the ground game. We don't want Bryce Young throwing for aggressive volume, and unfortunately, that directly affects Tetairoa McMillan. When Bryce Young throws for volume, it's good. I mean, it's not as if he struggles. The results are good, but they don't want him to. They want to run a slower paced, balanced offense that leans on the ground game. They have significantly upgraded their offensive line. We talked about this. They're hoping to get Jonathan Brooks back and make this a nice dual threat here with him and Chuba Hubbard. Maybe one takes over. We've discussed all of this and the possibilities here. And what I've said is that we have to acknowledge that this Panthers offensive line is a very strong unit and they continue to invest in it. They want to transition this offense to lean more on a successful ground game, and they are continuing to push forward with it. We are not going to see an aggressive, massive leap in volume for Bryce Young. Now, I would expect a little bit, right? Because in reality, the man had literally just 4 games with over 200 passing yards last season. That is crazy, right? So I definitely see a bump coming. But we've got a long way to go in terms of a significant bump that would make me feel very comfortable with saying that Tetairoa McMillan has the same upside as the guys being drafted around him. That's the problem, right? Unfortunately. And the Panthers' defense isn't prolific, but it doesn't get enough credit. They keep games well within reach. So the Panthers don't have to force a ton of volume. They can just stay in their lane of what they want to do. And the result is most likely that Tet McMillan's outcome is probably a mid-tier wide receiver 2 at best. Best. More so, more than likely, a low-end wide receiver 2, right? Not a massive bust potential, but when you look at the guys being drafted around him, they all have higher ceilings, much higher ceilings and volume opportunities than McMillan is going to be able to have. So no offense to him, he will do well with the volume he gets, but when I'm looking around him, unfortunately, the ceiling is not there compared to the other guys. Now, this is admittedly nitpicky, but I was talking to Matt Kelly, the podfather, about this, and he actually made me feel a little bit more comfortable that maybe I'm not being nitpicky. Maybe I'm right on the money with this one. When it comes to early round talents, you always need to be nitpicky because they're all insanely talented. You're not ranked in the top 10 because you're in a good situation. You're ranked in the top 10 because you're a rock star, right? But I feel like we're overlooking a couple things with the Texans here. And while I'm not saying fade Nico Collins, looking at the players being drafted around him in the past 3 years of production with CJ Stroud, we might need a little bit of a reality check on expectations. Last year was a fine overall finish. Fine overall finish. He was wide receiver 10 in average fantasy points per game, averaging 12.7 fantasy points per game. That was fine in the context of last year. That's not fine overall. That number is a little bit misleading, unfortunately, because it's inflated. We had a ton of subpar wide receiver play because of injuries to wide receivers and their quarterbacks getting injured. It made numbers a little bit wonky. In a normal season, if you go back and look at what that number would get you, that's more like wide receiver 17 production. Wide receiver 17 production, and that's a guy that we are taking as a borderline round 1 pick. Yeah, that's a little shaky, guys. I'm not going to lie here. Now, he has had stronger finishes in previous years, 14.7 fantasy points per game, ironically on the number in both 2023 and 2024. But if I had to bet, the production is going to look more like 2025, right? Let's talk through it. Because again, Nico, he's a safe pick, right? Because he's the wide receiver 1. There's no competition in theory, right? I like some of the other guys, but really he's the wide receiver 1. He will be the target hog. He is getting you at least 1,000 yards. But in the context of what this offense has been trending towards and not needing to push aggressive volume with CJ Stroud because their defense is so fantastic, right? Again, why are we drafting someone borderline round 1? And we have a whole lot of evidence that physically he cannot get into the top 5 category, and there is no logical reason to believe that anything about that team would change to force the level of volume needed to put him into the top 5 category, right? Again, no insult towards him, right? But if you're looking at the players being drafted around him, they all actually have very clear paths to top 5 production. Nico is being drafted above his ceiling. I hate to say it, right? But if you can look me in the eyes and tell me that you really see CJ Stroud giving him 150 targets, 1,400 plus yards, and 10 touchdowns with the level their defense is performing right now, only getting better, then sure, draft away. If you can look me in the eye and say that and genuinely believe it, draft him. But I don't believe it's going to happen. This is how you guys know I'm not biased. As a Packers fan, I don't like to do this one, but I don't see a logical reason to draft Jordan Love. Jordan Love can throw for volume. That's not the issue. He can finish as the overall QB1 in any given week, right? But on weeks where he does not need that volume, then the volume doesn't come, you are getting a mid to low end QB2. That is what you are getting. His production in terms of completion is fine. He was more than careful with the ball. Touchdowns weren't prolific, but they were fine. But the problem is that the Packers lean heavily on the run now. It is not even close. They were 7th in rush attempts last year and 27th in pass attempts. They had an even more ridiculous split in 2024. 2023 was the last time they ran more of a balanced attack that leaned on the pass just like a tiny bit there. So what changed from 2023 to 2024 and now? Well, it's not a mystery. They brought in Josh Jacobs and they shifted the identity of this offense. And since their defense has become a solid unit, it is very clear what Matt LaFleur is trying to do. This offense is running efficient. It doesn't run a ton of plays. It leans on the run. It gets the most bang for their buck. The fantasy translation on that is not great for Jordan Love, unfortunately. If they have to, they can push the ball aggressively through the air, but they don't have to do it, then they're not gonna do it. And because Jordan Love is more of a mobile pocket passer than a running quarterback, there is not rushing upside there to help provide a better cushion, a better floor here. So again, no offense to him, love him, but you're drafting a guy who will frequently finish below average fantasy point performances. Honestly, his ranking should be further back in the CJ Stroud area. I'm not going to lie on that one because low-key, it's kind of the same thing in terms of output. I have not minced words this offseason with Denver. Again, I am not going to start. Congrats to them. Congrats on their moves towards a Super Bowl, right? But this was not great for fantasy football. Denver's wide receiver room is one of the deepest in the league. It was already irritating last season, people. We had the surge of Troy Franklin, who, again, is not going away. And the intermittent usage of guys like Pat Bryant and Marvin Mims, making it so that while, Courtland Sutton was technically the wide receiver one, there wasn't a big main consolidation of targets, meaning that one week Courtland Sutton would have 6 receptions, 100 yards at a touchdown, and then the next week you were getting 1 fantasy point. It was not predictable. It was not super coverage dependent. There were times where it was super coverage dependent, right? But it was very chaotic, unfortunately. Now we throw Waddle in. I'm good. Nope. Now you're going to hear a lot of talk about how they've changed the offensive coordinator and it's going to help push pace of play. I'm going to caution you on thinking that that is going to make a huge difference from a fantasy perspective. Will it help their team in real life? Yeah, sure, cool. But again, we are looking at fantasy perspective. Please do not mistake that we are going to see a massive uptick in volume, right? They threw the ball over 600 times last year. Now, what they can do and should do is actually become more efficient and produce more points, right? An increase in passing touchdowns makes sense here. I don't think there's going to be more targets. There's not going to be a significant leap in attempts, right? But better offense, more production, more passing touchdowns. Now, my skepticism with that increase in passing touchdowns is, would that specifically go to the 5'10" guy and not the wide variety of 6'2" plus high towers, right? Perhaps more goal line opportunities as well for the running backs, That's where you start to question things. So if there's not going to be a massive increase in targets, but the touchdown opportunities maybe are going to increase, who exactly is that going to go to? I talked about this one a while back, but it's time we bring it back here. I am much lower than consensus on Dalton Kincaid, and I want to go lower. I wish I could go lower. There is no scenario in which I will be drafting Dalton Kincaid. If you ever catch me with a share this season of Dalton Kincaid, call an ambulance. It's a sign of help. Something has happened, right? I have zero issue with Josh Allen or James Cook, but I want nothing to do with Buffalo's pass catchers. No piece of that mess. It is perfectly okay to draft a player based on talent, even though the situation is not good for his target potential, right? Colston Loveland. Love him. Drafted into an objectively crowded offense last season, still managed to push through and thrive back half the season, right? It happens, right? You don't have to say, well, I just need the best case scenario. Often you can just draft your guys, but this is not the same scenario, unfortunately. I dove into this in my Substack article on DJ Moore if you want to check it out, but the short of it, you have zero reason to believe this team is going to increase pass volume. All they did was add pass catchers to increase the quality of receiving options, not to make a massive leap in volume. And they did not subtract people. This is not a good scenario. They added in. They did not subtract. They are not adding a whole bunch of targets. Red flags. Now, there's also another issue, right? The Bills said that they could look at load management for Dalton Kincaid as a way to tackle Kincaid's persistent injury issues. Unfortunately, he struggled to stay healthy over the past 2 seasons. He's been playing through injuries. Admirable, he's been trying, but it has been an issue, unfortunately, and you could see it in terms of his production and overall usage. So if they're using load management on him, and we've got a concern that targets are going to just be way too spread around because they've added in talented players, that's not a good scenario, right? There's just way too much working against Dalton Kincaid to draft him as a top 10 tight end. when he has had back-to-back seasons of tight end 20 and tight end 30. And his peak was tight end 11 during his rookie season. I can't advise it. I can't. We got DJ Moore and rookie Skylar Bell added to the mix. We know that they still want to try and make things work with Keon Coleman. We are going on year 4 for Dalton Kincaid in the exact same situation that he has been in 4 years, and he has failed to give us a top 10 season, yet he is being drafted as a top 10 tight end. Don't make a lot of logical sense here. There's so many things working against Kincaid, it's hard to keep track at this point. I don't see a reason to draft him. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. You can find me across all social media platforms at It's Tara Time. I am also live every Wednesday on YouTube at 8 p.m. EST, so make sure that you stop by and chat. It is always a good time. You can ask me any questions that you want. You can also subscribe to my Substack if you want to support me another way. And if you are looking for new fantasy football tools in 2026, look at Player Profiler. You can use my promo code TARA for 25% off at Player Profiler.